When I got in, it was very much, this isn't for me. And that was very difficult, right? Because I'd moved, it was an alien environment to me. I was studying for these exams and I realized the job role wasn't for me as well.
Welcome to Everyday Leadership, a podcast where I interview leaders not defined by position or title. Everyday people who lead their lives in extraordinary ways. And on this podcast, they share their stories, their life lessons, and practical tools in the hope that it will inspire everyday people like you and me to realize we are everyday leaders. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with one of the only 12 Black fund managers in asset management. At least that was the case according to a new financial report in 2017. Justin Onuekwusi shares his story of navigating that industry. He talks about how relationships are key to your progress. He shares how proactive is so much better than being reactive. We talk about the importance of family and having a great support network around you. He gives examples of being authentic both at home and at work and why it's so important. And he actually gives another great example of what it looks like when your C-suite are on board to create a truly inclusive culture. Let's jump straight into this episode as you're going to learn a hilarious story of how his teacher's lie ended up leading him into asset management. Welcome to Everyday Leadership. So today I have the pleasure of sitting down and talking to Justin Onuekwusi. Have I got that right?
So I pronounce it Onuekwusi.
Onuekwusi.
Yeah, that's what my dad pronounced it. But I think if you took it the Igbo way, it'd be Onuekwusi.
Uh-huh. For those who don't know, like Justin's is the head of retail multi-assets at Legal & General. He is one of the, I think it's 13 Black fund managers. So we're definitely going to dive into that. But even before we do that, at the time of recording this, we've just gone into lockdown 3.0. Hopefully as someone who looks after a team, you're a husband, you're a father, I think it's only right to ask, like, how are you feeling?
I suppose, first of all, I'm not happy about it, but that's not going to help anything, is it really? So I always look at these things as challenges, and I think as people, there's always challenges put in front of us. So I always look at, what can we actually do to navigate this challenge? And actually, I think is that's driving me to kind of get through this more than anything else. How can we improve communication in the team? How can we create initiatives to drive better performance? How can, as a family unit, for example, two young daughters, how can I help my daughters navigate this? And I think those kind of challenges to me actually drive me to kind of get through this.
Was there anything that the last lockdown that you learned from that you're definitely going to implement again that can help?
Yeah, so I think the key thing for me is being more organized with my time. So one of the things I've done for the next 6 weeks, I've gone through my whole calendar and I've actually specified the time that I want to spend with my family, or maybe it might be lunch here, dropping my daughter off at nursery. One of my youngest daughters off at nursery. Nurseries are still open. It might be sitting down, doing some homeschooling with my kids, sitting down with my wife in the evening. All of these things now I'm putting into the calendar, because if you don't do that, then other things, urgent things, will come up and you'll just push back those important priorities. So actually prioritizing those important things I think are really important, and that's definitely something I've done this time around. I'll let you know whether it works, but it's I think actually having that mindset should help me anyway.
Oh, I like that. That's really important, isn't it? Like, you prioritize what is important to you rather than letting other things fill your calendar, which we all know happens easily.
Yeah.
And just looking at your career and what you said, obviously you work as one of the only 13 Black fund managers in the UK. I'm curious to find out, how did you actually get into asset management? Was this something that you wanted to do from when you were a child, or?
Not really. So my desire to get into the city was really driven by a discussion that I had with a sixth form maths tutor on a open day when I was looking forward to doing my A levels. I knew I wanted to do maths and politics, and I felt that actually economics was probably the sensible A level to do alongside them. I was always good at maths, number one. Politics, because I was very interested at the time in political movements. In particular, it was a time when New Labour had come into power. It was like, there's a change in the political scene and so on and so forth. So it just grabbed my interest. And then economics kind of sits in the middle of politics and maths in a way. So that's why I chose those three A levels. But the head of maths, when I was walking around the open day at sixth form college, he asked me, do I want to be? He said that if I do maths, I'll have a chance of becoming an actuary. And I didn't know what one was until then. And I was like, okay, what's that? And he goes, you can use stats and so on and so forth. And you get to use your maths, and you get to help solve complex problems. And it's the highest paid profession in the world. And I was like, really? So so after that, I thought, well, I've never really had money growing up. So that sounds really interesting to me. And actually I get to use my maths as well. So I pursued this actuarial profession all throughout my A levels, throughout university. I went to University of Economics at Warwick. And then I started doing actuarial work in, 2003, just after the dot-com bubble burst. And I realized that, after, well, first of all, it wasn't the highest paid profession in the world. He lied about that. and then it just wasn't for me. And it's a great profession, but it just wasn't for me. I needed something that was a bit more fast moving. It's pension consulting where I was. I need something that was a bit more dynamic, a bit more faster moving. And therefore, investment consulting was an area within that pension, within consulting, which to me was just a lot more interesting to me. Why? Because, understanding equities, asset classes, bonds, property, etc., was just seemed a lot more interesting to me. So after 8 months of working within the actuarial profession, I kind of knocked on the head of investment consulting's door in where I was at AON Consulting and said, look, is there any chance that I can move to investment consulting? And, within a month, he interviewed me with one of the team heads, and I was on the investment floor, on the investment consulting floor. And then, I suppose the rest is history. Then I realized I did really have a strong passion for investment. And that's the area I wanted to remain in. Very early on, they pushed me to go and see clients. They were like, so I dropped the actuarial exams and did exams called the CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst exams. And I quickly got through them. And they were like, go and see clients. And I was like, well, I'm only like 24, 25, and I don't really know anything. So, let me kind of focus on investments first of all, understand investments before going to see clients. So I moved to Merrill Lynch to do investment research, fund research in the wealth management division. And then the head of portfolio construction at Merrill Lynch 3 years later moved to Aviva Investors, and he asked me to come and join him. He said, you did a great job with me at Merrill Lynch, working with me at Merrill Lynch. So come and join my team at Aviva Investors to become a multi-asset fund manager. And since then, I've never really looked back. It's worth noting that 13 black fund managers point, that was based on a report by New Financial. It was actually 12 in 2017. I think there have been more appointed since then, but I suppose the message is still very similar. There is a stark underrepresentation of black fund managers in the city of London, and to a point where it's pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, that's a point I definitely want to explore. But there's something in your story that you just mentioned that I think you just kind of skipped over, and I want to go back to. To get into your first role, your actuarial role, this is when you finished Warwick University.
Yeah.
You were straight A students, Russell Group, but it took you a very long time to get that first actuarial role.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you finally got that role, you were still willing to be like, this is not serving me. I need to move into something else.
Yeah. So you're right. I applied to between 60 and 70 job applications as a third year student at university. I realized very quickly I failed to get an internship in my second year. So I realized that, it's either I get a role now or I go back to, Manchester and if I'm not going to get a role after applying for 60 or 70 jobs, then, what hope will there be if I go back to Manchester? So yeah, I for a lot of the companies that I applied for, I just didn't simply hear back from them, to be honest with you. But there were definitely a lot of roles that I went for, all actuarial roles, because I was determined to get into the industry. And then you're right, when I got in, it was very much, this isn't for me. And that was very difficult, right? Because I'd moved from Manchester to London. It was an alien environment to me. I was studying for these exams, and I realized the job role wasn't for me as well. But yeah, I took it on myself, I suppose, to really change my role. And it goes back to, I don't know if you've read the book, The 7 Habits of Effective People, which I've started to, I've recently just finished again. I think it goes back to this proactivity versus reactivity, and that you can change your own destiny by being proactive. And that's something that, for whatever reason, I've always strived to do.
Oh, it's powerful. I think especially in a time right now where there's been a lot of changes that this pandemic has created, and that people either questioning, should I move from what I'm doing right now, which I don't want to do, and move to something else, or people who've actually lost their jobs and they're worried about transferable skills. Being able to realize that actually it's possible for you to make that change because you own your destiny rather than letting someone else control that.
Yeah, I completely agree. There is a thought that people always say, follow your passion. And to some extent that's true, right? Because there's a lot of people that I speak to who aren't really passionate about the roles they do, and therefore it makes them very unhappy. But I do think there is at least, a lot of mileage in actually following your skill set. And naturally, usually your skill set or your strengths tend to be where your passion lies anyway. So I do think that is that even in this environment is really important.
So true. Going back to what we're just talking about right now, around the lack of diversity in your field, how did you feel stepping into that world and navigating that space that you said was alien to you, and interacting with people that weren't necessarily from your world and the way you operate, especially in London. London being so diverse and multicultural, you'll expect it to be different.
Yeah, so I've always had this challenge, and it goes back to going back to Manchester and the schools that I went to. So my father, I didn't grow up with my father, but he was a Catholic, and my mum brought me up as a Catholic. Myself, my little brother, was a Catholic, and therefore I went to Catholic schools. And the Catholic schools in Manchester at the time, they weren't very diverse. They had essentially were made up of 50% white English and 50% white Irish descent. And it is that I think I've got very used to code switching and moving from my family unit, moving from, where I actually grew up, around the area that I grew up, to the school environment. I got used to changing the way I speak, the way I behave in each of those environments. So I think actually that's held me in relatively good stead in the workplace. That said, it was very difficult. And, part of it was being away from that home environment and being away from the family environment as well as being, somewhat, it felt a lot of the time like an outsider initially in the workplace. So, and there've been lots of incidents, microaggressions, being mistaken as a cleaner, janitor, a security guard, being subjected to some, pretty abhorrent microaggressions in the workplace. But it's only really since I started mentoring people that I've really started to understand the impact that can have on people. When it was happening to me, I just saw it as a reason to keep working harder and prove people wrong.
Wow. And we don't know, obviously, that whole working hard notion, working twice as hard, and how that gets you. And just based on what you just touched on right now, did you see the impact of you working harder made a difference in the way that people received you? Or
yeah, so there is one thing that made me work harder, a lot harder, at least initially. I got a review, an end of year review, and my work ethic was questioned. That's when it really dawned on me that I've got to go work a lot harder than I even was. To some extent, that's helped me I think that's helped me to progress in my career. But at the same time, I do think the sacrifice has been, when I talk about, I talk about prioritizing and talk about work-life balance and things like that. I do think that the sacrifice has been that. The other point which I'd stress is I realized for whatever reason, and maybe it's this code switching, and at a very early age, I realized that working hard was also about working hard in relationships. And that, to me, if you think of every job move that I've had since the first role, relationships have been a key to me getting that role. And all of my managers that I've ever had in the workplace, I still have strong relationships with them now. I still mentor, so they still mentor me in a way. In fact, I mentor them as well now. So I do think that we get confused what working hard really is. Working hard to me is working hard on your weaknesses and working hard in the areas that you're uncomfortable, not just the areas that you're strong on. So to me, that social side, building relationships, it is an area that sometimes people don't see as working hard and see as playing politics. But I see that as actually, in order to progress, you have to be liked. and the way to be liked is by building on relationships with your peers, your juniors, but also very importantly, your seniors.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the examples you gave about the different roles you moved into where people you previously worked with. So I would love some practical tips from you on how to build and develop and nurture relationships, especially for those who are in environments which, again, it's people they're not naturally used to. So it'd be quite good to learn from you.
So one of the things I realized or have realized is, in order to get, and it's from the mentoring really, people say to me, look, I'm working really hard here and I haven't had a promotion in X amount of years. And then you dig deeper into the conversation and you're saying, well, and you ask them, well, what does your manager think your weaknesses are? They don't know. Okay, have you had a conversation with your manager about your own career development and what your vision is, where you're going, what you want to achieve from your career? And the answer is no. Have you had a conversation with your boss's boss so you understand the wider business and how you fit into that? And the answer is usually no. So one of the things that, in those mentoring conversations, I encourage people to do is to start having those conversations. Start understanding your weaknesses. And your weaknesses might not be what you think your weaknesses are, might not be what other people think your weaknesses are. So understand what other people, because realistically, when it comes to promotion, it doesn't really matter what you think. It matters what other people think, because they're the ones who are going to rate you, right? So I think that has been key. I think being reliable to your managers is really helpful as well. When things really go wrong or when they really need that help, being able to step in is really important, and that doesn't get forgotten. So I think they're the key things, and then just having an open, transparent relationship as well. What I've realized over time is that being transparent and being open is a very good way to show authenticity. And I think people sometimes get confused about what authenticity really is. But to me, it's being open, being transparent, and just trying to be as much of yourself as possible.
And I'm very interested to learn, where did you actually pick up those skills? Was that from the schools that you went to, like you talked about in Manchester growing up, or was that from you just observing the environments that you're operating in, or was that even from your relationship at home with your wife, for example, and those kind of things?
Well, I think the first thing is just on the working hard point is I think I picked that up from my mum. So my mum, single parent, had a big family unit around her. 5 sisters, one of 6 girls, and 3 brothers. A grandmother who used to go around to her house every Saturday. So that family unit was really important to me. I had lots of cousins, so lots of socializing there. Again, that I think that has held me in really good stead, particularly when at times where things aren't going well. But yeah, I think being able to forge friendships in the school environment have definitely helped me forge friendships and build relationships in the work environment. but also it was an observation that actually to be happy at work, to progress at work, actually building meaningful relationships is really important. And therefore, that's what I've strived to do. And so I suppose that the other thing, the last thing I'd say is that eventually, it took me kind of 3 to 5 years to realize this, but understanding that your network is so powerful. And if you look at your network as helping you fill in your gaps, everyone's got gaps in their skill set. But if you then have a network that can fill some of those gaps, that's really important.
Yeah, I guess that's why it's also important to have a difference in your network and not have everything all the same, because you learn from different people and you get those skills from different people as well.
Yeah, I agree.
And have you ever felt like giving up on your journey through the different places you've worked in and different obstacles you've had to overcome, the microaggressions you've dealt with? Have you ever just thought like, I can't bother with this anymore. I want to do something different?
Every so often, I think, why am I doing this? In particular, when I think about the diversity work that I do, I think, well, if all the change that I'm going to make is marginal, and it's going to take a generation to make this change, then why spend all this energy trying to create these small changes? And every so often I come up against that roadblock. And a number of times throughout my career, I've thought, why am I doing this? But I think it goes back again to growing up and seeing my mum provide for both myself and my brother, and seeing the drive that she had to do that really drives me on. And now my mum looks at me, and when I talk to her about this, she kind of looks at me and says, she looks at me and says, well, why are you so driven? And I kind of point back to her and say, it's because of you. But she was never as driven as that. But I think, it was just a huge example to me. And then, I always remember, and this may be a very strange memory, but the song, Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace. I'm a Saturday's child, which means I work hard for my living. And my mum always said to me that you're a Saturday's child, so you've got to work hard for your living. And so probably that my mum's drive and that song kind of stand out in my mind as a reason why just not to give up. One of the things I always talk to my children about is, never give up. Keep on trying, keep on striving. And there's the Martin Luther King quote, and I'll probably get it all wrong now, but you'll know which one I'm talking about. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. That's something I strongly believe in.
Just keep on moving forward, whatever you do. Yeah, I love that quote. And just speaking about the work that you do around diversity, you're doing a lot of work around diversity, actually. Let's break it down. But I'm going to go first into talk about Black, and how did that come about?
That really came about when I started to take on a lead role in diversity at LGIM. So I'd always done a fair amount of work on the diversity side. So at AON and Merrill Lynch, I was involved in the diversity networks. But the CIO and CEO after I took on this diversity role within LGIM, spoke to me, got me into a room and said, look, when we look at our investment floor and we look at the industry, we see there aren't that many black fund managers. Why is that the case? And I was like, that's a very big question. And so I said I'd get back to them. And then at the time, there was a group called the Diversity Project forming, which was an amalgamation of different companies in the investment sector looking to create inclusion, looking to drive inclusion and create change and create more representative asset management workforce. So I popped along to the ethnicity work stream there, and they were answering this exact question that my CEO and CIO had asked me, or they're asking the same question, why there's so few black people in top investment, sales, and C-suite roles. And, one of the reasons we thought, or one of the reasons that create this problem of underrepresentation is that it just wasn't spoken about. So pre-George Floyd, and the death of George Floyd last year, ethnicity, people were so uncomfortable talking about it. So therefore, we felt actually creating a platform called Talk About Black, where we actually normalized the conversation around ethnicity, just made a lot of sense. And yeah, that platform has gone from strength to strength. We've got, a number of areas that we focus on. So you've got community, where, community pipeline, entry level and progression. And, right across what we call those kinks in the hose pipe, which stop the talent from getting through. We try and unkink each of those to really drive change in the asset management industry, but also beyond that. And it is a lot of work. It definitely is a lot of work, but it's something that I feel passionate about, and I truly believe in order to create a more representative industry and industries across the UK, that we've got to start unkinking that hosepipe.
I'm actually intrigued on two levels. Well, something you mentioned, the fact that your CEO and CIO observe that there's a problem. That's something that it's not always talked about that much, because a lot of times it's like, the leaders at the top, they're white and they don't care about what's going on underneath. How was that conversation?
It was, to be honest, it's a conversation that LGIM have been very open to having. I think LGIM are seen as being leaders in diversity and inclusion in the asset management industry. And I think rightly so, because they're willing to have those difficult conversations. They're willing to unpick the reasons for underrepresentation. And I think that holds them in really good stead, to be honest with you. And they've been very supportive of, let's be honest, it is quite a difficult issue to discuss. And they've been very honest and transparent, open to the world, to their client base, and on, outlets, just social media and the media, about where they stand. And I think that is extremely powerful. And since then, the CIO and the CEO have changed. But the culture and the drive to create a more representative industry is still there. So now you could argue that I've been a big input into that, into driving that conversation, but you also need a business and a company which supports you through that. And LGIM have definitely done that.
Oh, sounds like it's some cultural habits that a lot of organizations need to take on board and embody.
I think so. And this is where the diversity project actually is very helpful, because it means that people can see what good practice is and actually look to partner and emulate that, and that helps drive change, right?
Yeah, it does. But have you ever felt that you, speaking about race, talk about Black, the diversity projects, those kind of things, would hold you back or in your career or be a problem? Or if you felt that it was you being in that position, you had to speak about it, you didn't have a choice?
I think it's dawned on me that I have to. Because if I don't, then who will? You know, if I've got to my position and I'm not really willing to have open conversation about ethnicity, about representation, about diversity, about inclusion, then who's going to do that? And you know, over the last few years, I've got to say, you know, LinkedIn is completely blowing up, and you know, you got like lots of like people who aren't in the position that I'm in, asking for, you know, mentoring meetings, asking for advice, asking for help, asking for guidance, and as that has gained momentum, that's just reinforced my feeling on if I don't at least take some sort of leadership in this area, then who will? And it's worth noting, my passion isn't just in ethnic diversity. It's also, I've done a lot from a gender perspective. You know, I'm a judge on the Women Investment Awards, the Women Investment Awards. I help design the Women Investments Festival. It's actually diversity across the board. And also I head up all of the networks within LGIM that drive diversity across the organization, as well as doing a talk about Black work. So it's not just, importantly, it's not just ethnic diversity that I'm passionate about. It's actually representation across the board.
See, that's why I said you do a lot. I didn't want to say it. I wanted you to say it for yourself. Like, you do a lot. I think there's so many times, yeah, we're so humble and we're like, oh, I'm just gonna brush over it. Like, no, like what you do is really trying to drive change, and you've been doing this for years. So that's why I'm like, yes, Justin, speak up, say what you're doing. I think one thing about Talk About Black that I really liked was it's not just you. There's a number of you guys who've come together and are working together to drive this forward, which is amazing.
And that's it, right? It's a number of like-minded people driving change within the industry and beyond. But importantly, it's not just Black people. It's actually, if you look at the membership now, we're over. The talk we did in June, we got like 1,700 people on the call, and it's all different ethnicities. You look at the last call we did, 1,000 people, that was a mix of 50-50 ethnic minorities and white people. So to me, if we're really going to create the change, actually, we need everybody to engage, no matter what ethnicity you are. And I think that's probably been the most pleasing thing of Talk About Black, is just how inclusive almost the drive to greater representation has been.
Together we'll succeed.
Exactly.
I'm curious to find out what your definition of leadership. You lead teams, you've had great leaders you worked with, your mentor, and different things you're involved with. So how do you define leadership?
That's a really good question. I think my definition of leadership is changing over time, actually. And, you know, I'm a big Manchester United fan. So I've been brought up, you know, throughout my childhood, I suppose, with Alex Ferguson. And he did a great book on leadership, which, and, you know, people people think that, his leadership was about the hairdryer treatment and so on and so forth. But actually, it was being able to adjust to different personalities and provide a platform for people to meet their potential. So leadership to me is simply that. It's knowing how to adapt your behavior so that other people that you work with can get to their full potential. So that's probably the definition that I would give. And I think this is really important because people think that leaders have to be senior, but actually you don't have to be senior to be a leader. And I think that anybody can actually show leadership within the organization, but actually outside of organizations as well.
In what way?
In what way? So you can show leadership at home, right? With your family by doing things like putting things in the calendar and prioritizing, right? So one of the things I say to one of the big challenges I think of, I do these mentoring circles. I do them every month for people who are just starting off in the industry between 0 and 10 years experience. And I'd love to get you on there actually to be a mentor. And it really is just giving advice to people who are just starting in the industry about navigating their own career. And one of the things I encourage people to take leadership in is leadership of their own personal development. It is amazing to, when you dig deeper and how you have conversations with people about where do they want to be long term, how do they want to develop, and people can't answer those questions. So if you personally cannot answer those questions, then it's very difficult for an outside organization, your manager, your company, to really formulate your own personal development. Your personal development has to be driven, and I'm a true believer of this, your personal development should be driven by yourself. Your company should be there to support you. Your manager should be there to support you, but you need to drive that personal development yourself. And I think that is really important. So going back to your question, that's where I think people can really show leadership in driving their own career and where they want to be. And listen, you will have setbacks, right? And everybody has setbacks. And I'm privileged in a way that, maybe I've had less setbacks than some other people, like, some of the mentees that I speak to. But still, I think it's important. The people who can navigate these businesses, the people who can deal with these microaggressions, are typically the people who understand where they want to be.
See, those are the gems we're talking about. You talked about your mom a number of times and how she raised you and your brother. And what would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned from your mum, apart from what you've said so far?
I think there's a few things, actually. The first one, my mum was a teacher. So education, I think, is really key to social mobility. And it's not just being academic. It is actually thinking education maybe just outside of the national curriculum, constantly learning, developing your emotional intelligence. Again, to me, that's education. So my mum taught me that, the importance of education. And then going back to the couple of things that I said, drive. I think that the reason why I've got a bit of a hard head, I'm a bit stubborn, I'm focused, is because of my mum and the drive that she showed. And then I think it's the importance of of family, and how important it is to have a support network around you, because things aren't always going to go well. And you have to really try and build a network around you that can support you in those bad times. So I can still, call my mom up today and say, this has happened today. How should I navigate that? And actually, a lot of time it's just her listening, which really gives me that guidance. And she'll a lot of the time I come up with the answer myself, and she'll just say, well, if you think that, then that's great, and it's almost just that kind of that her not disapproving, which gives me which gives me that support. And as you get older and you move from location and move companies, that support network can change, but actually having it there is just really important. And it's not just family, it's friends as well, and it's ex-colleagues and colleagues.
Mm-hmm. The power of the network. I think one of the questions I want to ask you, obviously, you got two beautiful daughters.
Mm.
When you look at from when you grew up to where they are right now, completely different lifestyles that they're living to where you grew up.
Yeah.
So how do you bring them up, and how do you raise them, especially based on all you are currently doing right now and the world they're currently living in? What kind of skills are you bringing up and raising them with spirit to learn and adopt and take on to navigate in the best possible way?
Yeah, so I think one thing to realize is, as a parent, you're always learning, and similar to being a leader, what I've realized is there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to be a parent. So what I'm determined to do, I'm trying to do, is to make sure that they remain grounded. They recognize maybe not where they come from, but where I came from, because I think that's really important. They understand and value education. They understand and value working hard, which is two of my beliefs, which I've already mentioned. But they're both very different personalities. So being a father, being a leader, to me is just helping them fulfill their potential. And the way you do it might be different in each of their cases. But I think that's really important. And I think the other thing, the last thing I'd say is it is important to push people to fulfill that potential. But there is really quite a delicate balance between pushing people too much and helping them to fulfill that potential. And that's something that I think is different for each person. So learn how to do that is something that I'm still, it's a skill I'm still trying to develop. And hopefully I will get there. Otherwise, no. I think with the support, as I say, my wife, the grandparents, etc., and I think we'll get there.
Yeah, see, so a lot of times when people talk around, especially prior to COVID, we used to have the separation between work and home.
Yeah.
And what you just described right now is something that needs to happen at work. Recognizing that people are different and therefore you have to treat them individually. You have to push them, but you also create that safety around them. So know that even if they do fall, you're there to pick them up and to restore them. And that just comes from talking about your daughters. So it's those kind of principles that when you bring into that workplace, it makes such a massive difference.
And to me, that truly is what authenticity is. That is being yourself. That's what it really means. And I think people get really confused about what authenticity is. And look, everybody has to adapt in different situations. And I went to a talk by a personal branding coach, and he spoke to me about authenticity, and I think he described it really well. It's something that I've stolen from him, and I keep on using it now. Is that he said that, if you take the earth and you cut it in half, and you've got the core in the middle and the mantle around the outside, right? And he said that that the core is the stuff, it is the behaviors and the principles that you're not willing to change. But around that, there is a level of adaptation that everybody has to go through. The difficulty is, the more different you are to the majority, typically the more you have to adapt, and that's where it gets complicated. But I do think that those core values that you have at home, why wouldn't you have those same core values in the workplace?
Yeah, completely agree. 100% agree. And I guess one question I want to know, what does success mean to you?
Yes, I'm still trying to work that out. I think that success is having a vision, a long-term vision, and being able to, at the end of each year, being closer to that long-term vision than you were at the start of the year. And that vision is different for everybody. But as I say, the difficulty that a lot of people have is trying to understand what that vision actually is. So yeah, I think being very clear on that vision and being able to say, am I closest to that vision than I was 2 years ago, 3 years ago? That to me is success.
Are there any tools you can give people who are trying to craft the individual vision that has helped you when you've created yours? Or
I think it's just really understanding what you want to be remembered for, what you want your legacy to be. If you weren't in the room, what would you want people to say about you? To me, those things that help you define what your vision is.
Beautiful. This last question would be, how can people connect with you and all the wonderful things that you're doing?
No, I always say, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I do answer all of my messages. It may take me a little bit of time to get around to all of them, but I do connect to all of them. And I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and all of those places as well. So Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is probably the main way of connecting with me. Yeah.
Justin, I just want to say thank you for your time today. Thank you for the pearls of wisdom. More importantly, for the work that you're doing. It's making such a massive difference, especially like last year, and the resurgence of conversations that were being had in such an industry. I worked in finance, so I know a lot about funds. So I know how hard it was and difficult it was in the industry, but I know how having these kind of open conversations that you're doing with different things you're involved is making such a massive difference to people. And you're already living that long-term vision and that legacy we're talking about. When people talk about changes you're making, it's already come to fruition. So loving the work.
Thank you for having me on.
This is Everyday Leadership. I'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of Everyday Leadership. You can check out the show notes on www.mindsetshift.co.uk/podcast, where you can find out more about my guests and how you can contact them. You can listen to old episodes, or if you have a question about this episode or any other episodes, you can just press a button and ask me that question, and I'll answer it on the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, share this podcast with someone else. We'll see you next time on Everyday Leadership.